Hello, my name is Jo Bond. I'm currently studying towards an MSc in Animal Welfare Science, Ethics and Law at the University of Winchester. Today's presentation will evaluate current industry and public concerns surrounding the welfare of elephant species within captivity, with specific focus on the role of UK zoological and safari park collections. Wild populations of both African and Asian elephant species continue to experience extreme pressures. Whilst many of these remain multifactorial, key influences include poaching for the ivory trade, habitat loss through human encroachment, increased human-elephant conflict, some of which are deemed to be based on agricultural and commercial land use, and a combined interaction of a number of any. These combined interactions have led to noteworthy declines of both species within the wild population. Whilst many within the wider conservation industry seek for a solution, the presence of elephants within captivity provides respite for these animals through active security and the preservation of genetic information for future generations. For much of the UK population, elephants represent a beloved and long-standing presence within zoological collections, both within the United Kingdom and internationally. However, the welfare of elephants in captivity remains one of the greatest management challenges facing zoos, both from an animal husbandry and a public perception perspective. During this talk, I will focus on a number of areas under current review surrounding captive elephant welfare. We will look at firstly at the history of this species and their ongoing role and responsibility as a key flagship species within UK zoological collection and safari parks. We will then consider the welfare dilemma surrounding captive elephant husbandry and the risks associated, with specific focus on increasing areas of public concern and scrutiny. We will then evaluate current recommendations and industry guidelines focusing on key areas of development and optimal animal welfare. Finally, we will consider current expert responses within the zoological industry with specific focus to recent amendments and calls for improvements to elephant welfare. Whilst the presence of captive elephants presents an area of controversy for current generations, the species' status as a much-loved crowd pleaser remains throughout history. One such example is the famous Tiergarten Schönbrunn in Vienna, which documents the presence of one of the first examples of captive elephants within Europe in 1770. Our own London Zoological Collection followed in 1865 with the addition of England's first African elephant jumbo. Despite increasing concerns surrounding animal welfare, elephants within UK zoos remain in a number of places. The Asian elephant, for example, Elephas maximus, continues to present zoos with the opportunity of a charismatic vertebrate species, which is commonly used as a flagship species to engage the public, wider industry, and international governments of current conservation attempts. Whilst the suitability of captive elephants remains disputed, justification for a continued presence of both species remains, with many seeing it as a key method to generate conservational interest to both the plight of wild elephants and associated species. Current research presented by Biaza in 2010 indicates captive populations to represent just the tip of the iceberg for the species. However, the continued presence and ongoing breeding attempts aim to establish regulated breeding practices for conservation, while also removing the temptation for a wild-caught animal population. Captive elephants also present a charismatic and accessible species for public engagement, while also demonstrating direct links to field conservation and scientific research. Captive elephants also remain key to continuous improvements in breeding and welfare standards, with all Biaza listed zoos advocating ongoing conservation missions. Whilst captive elephants present a unique challenge to zoos and safari parks, basic welfare requirements remain, with collections holding legislative responsibility for the care and welfare of all species as documented by the Animal Welfare Act 2006. Animal welfare, as defined by Broom, is the state of an individual with regards to its attempts to cope within its environment. Good animal welfare implies both the fitness and the well-being of the animal, with all unnecessary suffering being prevented. However, for captive elephants, these needs are complicated by the presence of the environment, which is significantly different from the subtropic environment within which this species evolved. In order to meet suitable husbandry standards, zoos must operate procedures which exercise a daily duty of care for elephants, such as the provision of suitable housing, environment and dietary nutrition, while also recognising the extensive behavioural and intellectual abilities of these elephants. Elephants as a species demonstrate complex social behaviour and sophisticated behavioural repertoires, which when considered in light of the species' longevity, only adds to the challenge. Sadly, in recent years, inappropriate welfare and neglectful practices have led to increasing public attention, causing a widespread industry response from the zoological and safari park industry. In an attempt to reverse past errors, BIASA, in collaboration with the University of Bristol, released a report in 2008 designed to provide scrutiny and shed light on current husbandry and welfare practices. The aims of this report were to gather opinion from an elephant welfare expert panel to finalise methods of welfare assessment, whilst also select variables for data collection during the study. Data was collected from all participating UK zoos that house elephants, each of which were visited 3 times. In order to obtain comparative data, African and Asian elephants were included in the study, as well as documented evidence from wild populations. The current state of welfare of elephants was deemed to be objectively documented, with specific reference to the relationship between their housing and husbandry standards, while also attempting to gain key information surrounding the individuals currently within the UK captivity. From those studied, 53 of the animals were Asian elephants, compared to 46 of African elephants, with ages of the individuals ranging from 6 months and 50 years, with African elephants representing the more senior end of the age range. Following initial consultation and increasing awareness of public concern, a number of key welfare concerns were highlighted. The first of this included space provision, followed by abnormal behaviours, including the presence of stereotypical behaviours which had been widely documented within collections, and finally the physical deformities seen within some individuals. Some of these were observed without further investigation, however a number required clinical examinations. Many of these challenges had been previously documented, but in much smaller collection-specific research. Therefore, this response allowed for a much more widespread investigation to be performed. In light of increasing public demands and concerns surrounding captive elephant management, one area which was first addressed within the report was the provision of suitable housing and enclosure use, which for many within the public realm was seen as a main motivator for criticism due to a lack of perceived space. Following investigation, BIASA discovered clear variability between space provision, with some UK zoos providing as little as 280 metres per squared per elephant, compared with 36 metres per square within larger collections. Across populations, elephants were also recorded to spend on average 83% of their daily activity indoors. Research presented by VZ 2006 outlined the value of time budgets and activity assessment as a baseline measurement for captive elephant welfare and the interpretation of observed behaviour, with specific focus to the impossible impacts of environmental management to an animal's physical and relational health, both intraspecies and towards human keepers. Whilst limited evidence was provided of current UK standards, VC acknowledged public concerns surrounding smaller or less sophisticated environments, which by many were deemed to result in direct pain or distress to the captive elephants. These observations were also supported by Clubb and Mason 2002, who emphasised the need for zoological collections to identify key aspects of behaviour specific to their own elephants and ensure environments and enclosures facilitated those behavioural needs of the species. Ultimately, elephants should be given choice and control over the way in which they spend their time. Sadly, due to the quantitative nature of Biasa's research, it is not currently possible to determine whether high percentage of indoor space use was based on keeper or elephant choice. The presence of stereotypical behaviours remains a continuing problem in captive managed elephants, and sadly these were also represented significantly within the UK population. Of the stereotypical behaviours that were observed, swaying and route pacing were deemed to be the most prevalent, with 67% of the population demonstrating swaying during daytime, an increasing number to 77% in nighttime observations. Route pacing was deemed to be the most common locomotory stereotypical behaviour, with 27% of elephants performing this during the day. 38% of elephants were also deemed to perform a stereotypical activity for more than 1% of their daytime activity budget, which was deemed to be a significant concern within the population. And 50% of the elephants identified performed some type of stereotypical behaviour at night. Unfortunately, current research was unable to confirm the source of such abnormal behaviours, with some within the industry recommending further research into clinical conditions of the observed individuals in order to exclude possible pathology and neural responsiveness as a means or a cause of those stereotypical behaviours. The next area of evaluation focused within the report was the presence of abnormal function or physical abnormalities. Of these, lameness was identified as a key area for concern. From the population, 22% of those observed were deemed to have an imperfect gait, 35 of them were deemed to have mild lameness, and almost over a quarter of the national herd, at 23%, were deemed to have an obvious limp or be severely lamed. Unsurprisingly, older elephants were deemed to have poorer gaits, which can be considered as part of, unfortunately, normal natural aging processes, and as a result some of these were deemed to be unavoidable. However, elephants that were given larger amounts of outdoor space during summer were deemed to have improved gaits, and most worryingly, 75% of the population surveyed were deemed to be either overweight or very overweight, suggesting a much wider concern amongst the nutritional provision of elephants and not only the enclosure use and suitability of environments. Research performed by Hapspley et al. In 2013 recognised comparative results with foot problems contributing to lameness in 84.2% of elephants within US collections. Whilst all collections reported regular performance of basic foot care, including pad trimming, the effectiveness of such techniques in reducing foot pathology was unknown. However, it must be emphasised that this was not deemed to be an area of neglect, as all collections within the study were EASA registered and therefore had completely complied with current health standards and routine husbandry provisions. It can therefore be assumed that, sadly, ongoing lameness and increased foot pathology is linked to the environmental provision of captive elephants and not necessarily current industry standards. The release of Biasa's findings in 2008 sent shockwaves throughout the wider zoological community, with many calling for an immediate response and change to existing welfare standards within captive elephants. Unfortunately, due to the longevity of the species, very little has actually reached the population so far. However, there has been the positive improvement of Biasa guidelines published in 2010 and the subsequent supporting development of DEFRA standards in 2017. However, for many within the community, this is not sufficient, which has led to some people calling for the immediate phasing out of current elephants within captivity. However, due to the size and longevity of the species, it is currently not deemed as an ethical option due to the requirement for elective euthanasia. BIASA, however, have recommended the restriction of breeding and the increased use of reproductive technologies. Through these, it is hoped that the population itself will become healthier and will help to avoid such concerns as the absence of estrus cycles in Asian elephants, which are currently seen as compromises to breeding. DEFRA have also recommended increased monitoring of animal condition with improved nutrition and the establishment of enrichment protocols. In response to this, BIASA have also formed the Elephant Nutrition Council, who are now working closely with zoos within the UK to improve welfare standards and to overcome concerns of obesity which have been documented in the BIASA report. Sadly, many of these changes will take longer than 10 years to demonstrate positive changes due to the lifelong nature of the species. It is therefore questionable whether such changes remain a suitable option due to the long time difference between implementation and realisation for the animals themselves. However, as you can see here, EASA continue to see it as a key focus for their missions, with a recent statement in 2019 identifying inherited practices remaining a challenge within the European Endangered Species Programme. In summary, elephant species remain a key part of conservation missions for a number of zoological collections. However, their presence alone presents a significant challenge to these zoological parks. Many inherited practices must be amended to increase animal welfare and increase species diversity, and in order for this to be effective, it must be a multi-organisational approach.